Anger is messy. Anger and sadness often live together. Angry women are threatening. Angry women create stereotypes and tropes. Michelle Obama was chased around, for years and years during the Obama administration for constantly trying to be like, I don't know what y'all are talking about with this whole the trope of the angry black woman. I'm just me. And I'm just paraphrasing her there. Right. So Audre Lorde back in the 1960s, 70s, black feminist authors were writing about how this was very, this is a way to box people in. Audre Lorde said something like, what was her quote? Every woman has a well-stocked arsenal of anger available at the ready, right? She had a lot of really cool quotes. Check her out. That's kind of what second wave feminism was really doing. I know we can critique second wave feminism a lot, but the same with Sylvia Plath and Clampett and Sexton and these other poets of the 60s and 70s were really starting to pull apart these ideas of women's anger. What is women's anger, and why are we so boxed in by our anger? How does this start? How far back does this go? Why are we dealing with these tropes and these stereotypes? If a woman acts out, she's more likely to be called a bitch, right? So what I'm actually talking about, the Greek and Roman world gave us not just these wonderful, democracy and all those great playwrights, but they actually created and codified these gender norms for over 2,000 years that we really take for granted. And so it's been in the last 50, 60 years where you really get to see some of this, calling them on it. In the last few years, like with the Trump administration, a woman named Rebecca Traister wrote a book called Good and Mad. And this was about how, how mad women were when Trump came into office because it rolled women's rights back 60 years. And now, thanks to look at Dobbs and what just happened last summer with Roe v. Wade being overturned, we're seeing the direct results of the rollback from women's rights, women's reproductive rights, women's ecological justice. All of these issues, they're all directly related, right? When Hillary Clinton wrote the book, What Happened After the 2016 Election, she had to go to voice coaching lessons because she did not want to appear angry or, worse yet, shrill. Women's voices is often associated with weakness, even though there is no direct correlation with how strong a woman is. Or when men are called bitches. Maybe that's a new thing because Kat says it's a slur against it. Right, exactly. It's an emasculation, right? So so there was this, before I jump into the slideshow, one more thing. There was a study done by a woman named Dr. Ann Kring about 20 some years ago. And she found there was a huge difference between the way men are viewed with anger versus women. And that when it came to anger, bear with me. It came to anger, people are more likely to use the word bitchy and hostile to describe female anger, while male anger is more likely to be described as strong. The other thing about when they were studying the groups of men and women predominantly had bad feelings about their anger. They had feelings about feeling more apologetic. This was, again, 25 years ago. Maybe things have changed. That could be a good argument, right, Kat? I mean, who knows, right? Has it changed? I don't know. I love the way you all, like a couple of weeks ago when we said the Medusa unit's coming up, y'all are like, yeah, female rage, When I teach in Hadwana to some of the other classes, they freak out, okay? They think that it's some of the most grotesque and brutal poetry they've ever read in their lives, and they're like, brutal people, brutal, la 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 la, and you all seem to totally get it. You understand this alignment of gender norms, boxing in, and how it leads to this, what do they call it? The idea of female anger as unnatural. Our whole culture is taught that at a very young age. It's also interesting how we get taught at a very young age that about monsters and women monsters who are part of some kind of, it's, we root for the hero, we do not root for the woman. And so often, as we're going to see when we get into heroines like Mulan and Atalanta in a couple of weeks, we're going to see how women, especially mortal women, usually have a pretty bad ending. They usually get turned into a constellation, an animal, or they die when they try to change what fate has decreed for them in Greco-Roman myth. So this kind of stuff goes back a long, long way. There was also something, actually, I'm going to hold on to that for a second and get into, it's a strange place to start, though, when we look at, I'm going to share the screen now. It's a strange place to start. You might think, wow, okay, and Miranda or Kat can give me a thumbs up if you can see this slideshow. Great, thank you. And it's like, why start with Athena, right? Well, I think a lot of us know the myth. So why don't we go ahead and just get the myth out of the way? Who wants to tell it? Actually, I stop there so I can see you all. Who wants to tell the myth in a quick way? And I know there's a couple different versions out there. We just want to kind of get set our baseline so we all understand. Hi, Kat. Go ahead. Tell us.
Okay. Well, there are a couple different versions, but I think the one that is most appropriate to what we're discussing in class is that Medusa was a beautiful woman and caught the eye of Poseidon, and he raped her in Athena's temple. Mm-hmm. And Athena was enraged by the fact that her temple was defiled by this act. And I don't know why she didn't get pissed off at Poseidon, but she took out her rage on Medusa. Mm-hmm. And turned her into a monster, and made it so that her gaze would turn men to stone. Depending on which version you look at, mm-hmm. That's when she got the snakes in her hair. She already had snakes in her hair, blah, blah, blah. And she had two sisters. Depending on which version you read, either she was the only mortal one or she was the only immortal one. Again, it's like there's a whole bunch of different versions.
Thank you.
That's and good. It wasn't until Perseus came to slay the Gorgon, and then he put her head on his shield, and it still retained the powers to turn people into stone. And he used that as his sigil in warfare down the line.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well done.
Oh, and when blood came out of her neck, it went into the waters, and that's how the Pegasus was born. And one other mythological creature that I had never been able to pronounce the name of.
Very good. Chrysaor.
Yeah.
So who was a healer. And so her blood was able to both heal and cause disease, which is interesting depending on how it was used. So yes, again, giving birth to, those are really good added bonuses, right? It's kind of interesting how formidable her power was even in death, right? Very nice. Does anybody want to add to that, or should I go ahead and dive into the slideshow? Good. So we know that Athena and Medusa are inextricably linked by this story. And just like when we look at Cretes and the Minotaur, sometimes there is an older version of these stories, or sometimes these stories are taught based on the newer patriarchal values that Zeus's people provided, right? So there's a lot of trivialization of the earlier goddess cultures going on, the indigenous cultures of mainland Greece. But we also, Athena was a really, she was one of the goddesses of the old. There's actually a version of Athena mentioned in Crete, good old Crete again, right? So maybe our ancient goddess Athena was originally from Crete. I don't know. You could look that one up for sure. But there is some kind of a tribute to her found in the Linear B writing on Crete of Athena. She was a counselor to kings and a protector of the kings. Immediately think of Odysseus, who she helped, right? She also counseled Achilles in in the Odyssey. So you have, obviously, you've got these earlier versions of Athena. You've also got some earlier versions of Medusa too. So just to give you a little bit of here's our Kenosis, right? Here's our Crete, and here's Mycenae. As you might remember, Mycenae, which is part of mainland Greece, was also a powerhouse. This is kind of where they said, I think, where they launched ships and went to battle against Troy. And so it was during this age before the Dark Ages. So this is important to see, right? We've got the Mycenaean age, which is when this area became very powerful. It's kind of where Sparta is. And here's Troy over here. Here's Crete down here. So the Mycenaean age then was 1900 to 1100 BC. The reason why I'm bringing it up, because Crete was a powerhouse. Remember, it had its heyday until about 1700 BC. By then, it was trading with Mycenae. So Athena could have easily come here. This is all before the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is when they think the Trojan War was fought. So all of this stuff was getting kind of cemented with who is who in terms of our pantheon, because it's not until you see 800 BC is when you have Homer and Hesiod, Iliad and the Odyssey, you have Theogony, you have these beautiful works of art or writing literature coming out. But that literature didn't come out of a vacuum, and there's a good chance it wasn't just Homer who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're probably based on this oral tradition that came out of this period where there wasn't a lot of artistic output. Everything was kept alive through storytelling. Okay, I just wanted you to keep that in mind. So you've got these older versions of what Athena might have looked like. And then you've got a time period here. The classical and Hellenistic time period is when we get our great playwrights, who I'm going to talk about in a second. It's where we get the ideas about democracy also coming out at the same time period. And this is when we have the codification of a lot of these gods and goddesses. They wouldn't have needed explanation. Everybody would have known who Zeus was by then. Everyone would have known who Athena was by then. The reason why I'm bringing this up is, look at this. These are statues of Athena 520 BC. So yeah, we're definitely entering this classical age, but these are based on earlier images of her. Can someone tell me what's different with the Athena you know today versus these pictures?
The Athena we know is a lot more masculine.
Yes.
A lot more like she's covered in like war, like not like war. She's not like in like full on suits, but she has a lot more like metal on her. She looks much more like, she doesn't look very like, these photos have her like in sort of like a dress, like, and she has like a little shawl around her.
Right.
A little headdress, where the Athena we know is very much not that. Like it's very much more like she's not feminine at all.
Very good. So these are actually snakes that are all curling around her. So this snake imagery could have certainly been gotten and brought through, right? Passing down through a matrilineal inheritance, right? So it's something about, it's interesting how though, after the story that begins to be handed down about Medusa, her priestess, and Athena, the goddess, who's the daughter of Zeus, you start to see these images of her with a helmet, her now with a spear, becoming more masculinized, but also having more war attire that she didn't have before. So in a small amount of time, what starts to happen, and my dates could be a little bit off, but she has now this Medusa figure on her armor that she'll then put on, I think, she put that on her shield? I can't remember. But essentially, and look, she's still got the snakes associated with her, but she is now getting into this place where she's more associated with war, right? The wise side of war, right? Because like as a core of Athena's service, she was someone who was a counselor to kings, right? And that would have been early Mycenae before the Trojan War. So stories of Athena were brought in, but something really weird had to happen. And that is, where did my picture go? And that is this. Can anybody tell me what is so weird about Athena's birth?
She came out of Zeus's head fully grown.
Yeah, in full battle gear, right? And here's another picture of it. This is Hephaestus. He's one of the Greek gods. Supposedly he used his axe or something to be able to break the side of of Zeus's head open so she could come fully formed. So one of the things we talked about, like with the Sumerians and some of the ancient goddess cultures, was what? Gods robbing earlier goddesses of their abilities of procreation. So what in this story, you have Zeus, who was told that somebody was going to try to overthrow him. So he swallowed Medusa, the woman, and he became pregnant with what Medusa was pregnant with, which was Athena. And so by giving birth out of the side of her head, we have this new idea of, instead of in the loins, again, robbing the divine vagina, we have now out of the side of the head, creating the rational, creating the intelligent, removing nature from the equation, removing not just the vagina, but the whole idea of everything we saw last week with Isis and Osiris, having tethered it to nature, having that whole journey having to do with rebirth and renewal. Now you have the promise of a head chief god offering the ability to give birth to something without any help from a female, right? This coincides right alongside the Deuteronomists who wrote the Old Testament around 500 BC. Full erasure of the goddesses going on here at the same time, right? So now enter this idea of the Medusa. And the Medusa, her stories might, yeah, she was this beautiful Gorgon. She was the daughter of the earth goddess, right? Does that sound familiar? She's the daughter of the earth goddess. She's the daughter of an older religion. And so now Corfu, by the way, is a little island off the side of, on the left side, the west side of mainland Greece. And this was, looking at the Gorgon, kind of like we look at gargoyles, kind of look like we look at Sheela-na-gigs. That's another story. Essentially there as a protector of that building. So you can see in a way that Athena and Medusa might have had very similar roles in Mycenaean Greece, in before we get all of the myths that we're so used to, right? And then look at this next picture. Flanking! Look at the flanking. Lions flanking her. And this is the I think they call it the pediment, right? Which is the side of the temple, maybe possibly the entrance. And just take a look at this image that's her belt. Does anybody know what that image is?
It looks a lot like the top of the Asclepius.
Very good. It's a caduceus. It's a symbol.
That's what I meant.
It's okay. It's okay. It's the symbol for medicine, y'all, even today. Okay. So at one point, we were still understanding this idea of snakes as protection and of healing or renewal, rejuvenation, right? Again, going back to that earlier goddess. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Early storytelling of Medusa as part horse. And what is really wild is it's possible that Poseidon once called himself Hippios, which is associated with the horse. So now we're talking about, again, this Indo-European tribes people, right, coming in with their horses. We haven't seen a lot of horses on Crete, right? We haven't seen a lot of horses with the ancient matrilineal societies. It's these horses we start to see. And it's possible that Medusa and Poseidon were a thing before the story got rewritten. And this is Perseus, by the way, who is getting ready to kill her, right? And so it's here's this next picture. I just got to show you this. This is another fascinating depiction. Here's the Medusa. Here's Perseus with his sword. And here is Hermes, God, the messenger god. What does Hermes do? Hermes has the caduceus on his staff. So basically, masculinizing, appropriating this very symbol right here for the Greek gods to use, and fully demonizing Medusa as a figure, right? Because she's representing this older culture. We have the ideation, the adoration of the hero cult, which is suppressing the female-led societies. And how do you do that? Demonizing the snake, or utilizing where it might have come in handy, like the caduceus. So now we have these ideas of the stories. The stories start to shift, right? The stories shift with Poseidon and Athena. They're both competing. They want their name to be the big city, and so she gives yada yada. She gives Athens the olive tree, and they name the city after her. But what's so interesting, you guys, about Athena is she's kind of like the Ivana Trump of goddesses. Whereas where we might have seen her in Crete as someone who was part of the goddess, part of women-led ritual, right? The solstice cult, the cult of the sun being led by women. As we get into 400 and 500 BC, and we get to see these amazing playwrights, I mean, they are amazing. You got to give it up for them. There's a whole trilogy called the Oresteia, and it's about when the boys come home from the war and how a wife kills her husband because he brings his mistress home with him. And then in the second play, that the son kills his mother, and because she killed his father, if that makes any sense, right? And so everybody's up in arms, and the Furies, furious women, are chasing the sun around, and it is Athena that comes in and says, wait a second, I'm going to be the goddess of justice. So she lets the son off for killing his mother, matricide, justified because she killed the husband. And so here's what Athena says in this play. It is absolutely absurd, you guys. It is the claim of patriarchy against matriarchy. Athena in this play says, the mother is no parent of that which is called her child, only the nurse of the newly planted seed that grows. The parent is he who mounts. A stranger she preserves a stranger's seed, if no God interferes. I will show you proof of what I have explained. There can be a father without any mother, and that is who she devotes herself to, is her father Zeus, not the woman Medusa who got swallowed up by Zeus. She says, to confirm the argument of the new patriarchy, there is no mother anywhere who gave me birth, but for marriage I'm always for the male, and with all of my heart and strongly on my father's side. This is what Athena says. And so therefore she is creating a justice system, and she's also creating this incessant misogyny that will always take the male side. This goes right into early Catholicism, y'all, with Thomas Aquinas saying women are not a parent, women are incubators. The male seed is the vehicle of souls. The male sperm is what counts. Women are just planted, they're the garden, that's it, right? So what Athena does then, she is cementing and codifying all the new rules that are going to come out of this time period that are now 2,000 years old that we still take for granted. Athena sends away the Furies and argues on behalf of the sun, basically. And you can read these plays. They are fascinating. All of the plays are really based on developing a lot of democratic norms. Antigone is a very feminist play. I highly recommend you, if you were taking my Greco-Roman class, we study Antigone because it's about, that's another story. But there's two terms you all need to make sure that you know about, because we're going to be talking about them in our next quiz. For the next quiz, this is certainly something that you could study more on or discuss more on with your discussion on Wednesday or Monday. And those two terms are, you ready for this? The purity doctrine. Purity doctrine. Hold on, let me find my notes. The purity doctrine is something that was established by Constantine. And Constantine, 2,000 years ago, basically said that that women had no voice when they were sexually assaulted, and that they probably actually wanted the sexual encounter, or they would have yelled and screamed louder. Sorry, I know that's really harsh to hear. But this codified an idea that we blame the victim. We will always blame the victim. And that's one of the reasons why, to this day, it is only when a large collective of women complain about someone like Weinstein and O.J. Simpson. Who am I talking about? Not O.J. Simpson. Oh, Bill Cosby. That only after 50 women come forward are they to be believed, because one woman's voice is not enough. which is sick, right? It's a sickness in our society. It is something that has lasted and lasted and lasted and has not changed at all. The other thing I want you to to remember, it's something called the divine raptus. Again, this is part of the playbook for the hero cult, right? The shoot, where did my notes go? The hero cult. You can probably guess what it means, but essentially, the divine raptus is so many heroes are born. Why? How? Because their mothers were seduced by Zeus, right? Look at Leto, look at Danae, look at Europa, look at all of these women, mortal women in Greek. I mean, like, it's countless, right? How many different women we have that are seduced. And again, this is another term that gets used so lightly because children are learning Greek myths, so everything gets softened up. But it still sends the message home that women's anger is something that we do not trust, that's something that is threatening, something that is ugly, something we have to do something with. And so then the Medusa figure becomes this very image. Is she an archetype? Is she a stereotype? A lot of ways to look at that. So here's some of the newer versions of Athena then, right? So she's still got a little bit of the snake imagery, right? Let's hold on to this old ancient collective a little bit. And she's got the Medusa, face on her front. There's some different depictions of her. Again, this is still snake imagery, which I just love, right? There's just this incredible connection. Now we get into some in the Renaissance. So, during the Renaissance, the early modern era, you had this merging of humanism. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into Christine de Pizan in a couple of weeks. But humanism was this idea that people could be good without predestination, it was kind of a secular thought. It wasn't omitting religion by any means. So what they did was, a lot of people all over Europe, they brought back, even though they were very devoutly religious, they brought back the wisdom of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, as well as these myths. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many myths still alive today. So this is Caravaggio, and it captures her in her indignancy in the moment of her beheading. This is where Perseus, he's the one, as we know, who cuts off her head. By the way, he might have been a historical figure who actually started one of the early dynasties of Greece. We don't know. But this is the way they're able to, with Andromeda, looking at the Gorgon without having to worry about being turned to stone. So this is probably one of the most popular figures of looking at Perseus standing over the fallen body. It's hard nowadays not to see this concept as something as pure misogynistic. I'm not going to show you the picture of it. You can easily look it up. But Breitbart News put out this the picture of Hillary Clinton's face imposed upon Medusa's head during the 2016 election, and it shows her like looking, indignant and outraged. And the satirizing of Clinton as Medusa, a lot of people they're unaware of just how misogynistic this is. I mean, and now we can see Perseus as this aggressor, as a rapist, symbolically standing next to his fallen, body of the victim, standing in victory. Right. And so, the misogyny then was carried over into this election, meaning like all of these memes came out around Clinton, around Medusa during the 2016 election. All of these T-shirts that were for sale, like, for instance, showing Clinton, all the anti-Clinton stuff as Medusa. Life's a bitch, don't vote for one. Trump that bitch. You saw that all the time. Right? This stuff was everywhere. And so, by the way, when Benvenuto Cellini made this sculpture, he made it because he was worried that Italy was becoming too feminized. And he did it to honor the male and the masculine tradition. How about that? So the other places that Medusa is seen is not just right now, or right, current, the last few years, it goes back. You could also see in some of the articles I'm going to show you where that it was a group of women that started the French Revolution over a loaf of bread. And so when people were doing the anti-revolution stuff, they were using Medusa as the women representing this revolution. Again, it's a way to keep women contained within the box of the gender normalcy. Again and again and again. So then there's a little bit. And here's sources, by the way. So and by the way, the what's interesting with Perseus, right, is he is